Forget everything you've heard about prepper foods. The families who got through the last three major shortages without panic buying weren't relying on the usual staples. They've quietly stocked 11 everyday foods most Americans ignore. Here's the kicker. USDA. Projections show these items could jump up to 40% in price in 2026. That's nearly half more expensive in just a few months. My neighbor Sarah noticed this 6 months ago and has already saved over $200 on groceries just by knowing what to buy and when. Today, I'll share her full list, 11 foods, why they matter, and where to get them before prices spike. And a sneak peek. Number 7 alone could save your family around $500 this year. Number 1. Canned tomato products. While most shoppers are busy worrying about fresh vegetables in the produce aisle, the savviest families I know have been quietly loading their carts with canned tomatoes instead. And believe me, they're doing it for a very specific reason. Here's the part most people haven't heard. A supply chain report I recently came across revealed that tomato processing plants are currently dealing with the worst disruptions they've seen in about 15 years. A huge part of the problem traces back to California. Severe climate events there destroyed roughly 23% of last season's tomato harvest, and those losses are only now beginning to ripple through the food system. In other words, the real impact hasn't fully reached grocery store shelves yet. But it's coming. Now here's the interesting twist. Canned tomatoes aren't just something you keep around for spaghetti night. Families who really know how to stretch their food budget understand that a single 28-ounce can of crushed tomatoes can turn into the foundation for an incredible number of meals. Think about it. Soups, stews, chili, curries, sauces, and plenty more. One simple can can easily anchor dozens of different recipes if you know how to use it. Last week, my friend Mike, who happens to handle inventory for a large grocery chain, shared something pretty eye-opening with me. According to him, their supplier recently warned them that tomato product prices are set to jump about 35% starting March 1st. But here's the surprising part. Most grocery stores haven't adjusted their shelf prices yet. That means there's a small window where you can still buy these items at the old prices. Here's a simple tip that saved me quite a bit of money. Go with the store brand versions for now. I actually compared the labels and ingredients myself, and they're practically identical to the name brand cans. The only real difference is the packaging. Just last month, I picked up 40 cans for $1.89 each. By spring, those exact same cans are expected to cost around $2.55 a piece. And here's a quick storage trick. If you keep canned tomatoes in a cool, dark place, they can easily stay in excellent condition for 3 to 5 years. Number 2. Peanut butter. Here's one that might genuinely catch you off guard. Peanut butter could soon start feeling like liquid gold at the grocery store, and most shoppers don't see it coming yet. Think back to last year when people were already grumbling about how expensive peanut butter had become. Well, brace yourself, because if current trends hold, 2026 may make 2025 prices seem like a bargain. I recently came across a report from the National Peanut Board that hasn't received much attention outside industry circles, but the information in it is pretty eye-opening. Here's what's going on. The states of Georgia and Alabama, which together produce roughly 70% of the peanuts grown in the United States, have just gone through their most severe drought in about 4 decades. And unfortunately, that's only part of the story. Facilities that process peanuts into peanut butter are also dealing with sharply rising energy costs, partly due to new regulatory changes. When you combine weaker harvests with higher production expenses, prices almost always climb. But here's something the more forward-thinking families have already realized. Peanut butter isn't just something you spread on bread. It's actually a long-lasting, protein-rich staple that can sit unopened in your pantry for a very long time. On top of that, it's extremely calorie-dense, which means even a small serving can keep you feeling full for hours, something that becomes especially valuable when grocery budgets get tight. I recently spoke with Linda, a nutritionist who works with several emergency preparedness groups, and she shared a statistic that really puts things in perspective. Just 2 tablespoons of peanut butter deliver around 190 calories and about 8 grams of protein. In practical terms, that's almost like keeping a compact backup meal sitting on your pantry shelf. Now, here's a money-saving trick many shoppers overlook. Natural peanut butter often keeps better than the heavily processed versions because it doesn't contain extra oils that can eventually spoil. Not long ago, I found a massive jar of organic natural peanut butter at Costco for $8.99. By the time summer rolls around, that exact same jar could easily be priced closer to $12.99. And here's a storage trick that completely changed how I handle peanut butter. When you first bring the jar home, store it upside down for about a week, then flip it back upright. Doing this helps the natural oils distribute evenly, so you don't end up fighting with that annoying oil layer every time you open it. Number 3. Cooking oils. Alright, let's talk about a grocery item that almost nobody seems to be paying attention to right now. Cooking oils. While headlines and shoppers are busy worrying about the rising costs of beef and coffee, the savviest families I know have quietly been stocking up on oils as if they're preparing for a shortage. And honestly, there's a good chance they're onto something. Here's what's been happening behind the scenes. This winter, 3 major soybean processing facilities in the Midwest temporarily shut down for what was officially described as equipment upgrades. At first glance, that sounds routine. But according to a contact of mine who works for a regional food distributor, those closures weren't simple upgrades at all. He claims they were actually urgent repair jobs triggered by ongoing supply chain problems. And that's not even the biggest factor. New regulations from the Environmental Protection Agency are pushing refineries to divert a larger portion of vegetable oil production into biofuel manufacturing. In simple terms, that means less cooking oil available for grocery stores, and when supply shrinks, prices usually climb. Now, most shoppers assume oil is just oil, but families who've lived through shortages know that the type of oil you store actually matters a lot. They tend to focus on oils that last longer and handle higher cooking temperatures. Take coconut oil, for example. This stuff is almost unbelievably stable. If you store it properly, it can remain usable for 5 to 7 years without going rancid. Another bonus is that it naturally solidifies at room temperature, which makes spills or leaks far less likely in storage. Then there's avocado oil, which surprised me when I first learned about it. It has one of the highest smoke points of any cooking oil, around 520 degrees Fahrenheit. That means it works for just about every cooking method you can think of, from sautéing and stir-frying to even deep frying. Right now, many families are paying around $12 for a bottle, but estimates suggest that same bottle could climb to $18 by fall. Here's a smart tip I picked up from a chef friend of mine. Instead of buying those giant bulk jugs of oil, choose several smaller bottles. The reason is simple. Once a bottle of oil is opened, exposure to air slowly begins to degrade it. A few smaller sealed bottles will usually stay fresh much longer than one big container that's constantly opened. And here's a quick storage trick. Keep your oils away from heat and direct light. That nice, convenient spot right next to the stove? It's actually one of the worst places you could store them. I keep mine in a cool closet in the basement, and they stay fresh far longer that way. Number 4. Pasta. Alright, let's get into pasta. But not just the typical boxes of spaghetti or elbow macaroni you see everywhere. The families I've been observing lately have uncovered something about pasta that most shoppers completely overlook. Here's the current situation. Wheat prices have climbed to their highest point since 2012, and experts say the trend isn't slowing anytime soon. A big part of the problem involves Russia and Ukraine, which together normally account for about 30% of global wheat exports. Ongoing production and supply disruptions there are still rippling through the global market. But international issues aren't the only concern. Even wheat farmers here at home have been dealing with unpredictable and extreme weather patterns that are making harvests more difficult than usual. I recently spoke with Tom, a grain buyer for a large pasta manufacturer, and something he told me honestly stuck in my mind for days. According to him, wheat futures for 2026 are already about 40% higher than previous contracts. However, many pasta companies are still selling products made from older, cheaper wheat supplies. Once that inventory runs out, he believes grocery prices could jump in a way that catches shoppers completely off guard. Now here's where things get interesting. Not all pasta is equally useful when you're thinking about long-term storage. The families who handled previous shortages tend to focus on certain types that most people ignore. Take whole wheat pasta, for example. I know it doesn't sound very exciting, but nutritionally, it actually offers more fiber and protein than standard pasta, which helps keep you feeling full longer after a meal. I even found 20-pound cases at restaurant supply stores for about $18. which translates into months of affordable meals sitting in your pantry. Another surprisingly smart option is dried egg noodles. Because they're made with eggs, they usually contain more protein than regular pasta. They also cook faster, which can be helpful if you're trying to conserve fuel during an emergency situation. And here's a small detail that many people never consider. Pasta shape affects storage efficiency. Long varieties like spaghetti or linguine take up far more room than compact shapes. Families who plan ahead tend to favor options like shells, penne, or rotini because they pack much more efficiently into containers. Speaking of storage, here's a lesson I learned the hard way. Never keep pasta long-term in those thin cardboard boxes it comes in from the store. Unfortunately, insects love cardboard. The safest approach is to transfer pasta into airtight containers as soon as you bring it home. I once discovered weevils in an old emergency pasta stash that I had left in the original packaging, and trust me, that's not a surprise you want to deal with. One last thing most shoppers don't realize. Pasta doesn't truly expire the way many foods do. The dates printed on the box are mostly about peak quality, not safety. Number 5. Honey. Alright, now we're getting into one of the most fascinating items on the list. While a lot of people are busy filling their pantries with bags of sugar, the families who really understand long-term food planning have been quietly stocking up on honey instead. And honestly, there's some real brilliance behind that move. Let me start with a piece of science that still amazes people. Honey never truly spoils. In fact, archaeologists once discovered jars of honey inside ancient Egyptian tombs that were roughly 3,000 years old and still safe to eat. Imagine that, a food so stable it can literally survive for millennia. But here's the issue unfolding right now that has many experts worried. Bee populations are declining much faster than most people realize. Recent data from the National Honey Board shows that bee colonies have dropped by around 40% in just the past 2 years. And when bees struggle, honey production inevitably drops as well. If that trend continues, honey could become far more expensive and much harder to find. A friend of mine named Janet, who keeps bees as a hobby, shared something with me recently that made me rethink my own pantry pretty quickly. She told me that local honey producers are already increasing prices by about 50% for their 2026 supply orders. Once that shift hits large commercial distributors, grocery store prices will likely follow. But here's the real reason smart families choose honey over plain sugar. It isn't just a sweetener. Raw honey naturally contains antimicrobial properties, which means it can act almost like a natural remedy in certain situations. During last year's flu season, I used it several times for sore throats and coughs, and honestly, it worked better for me than many of the cough drops you find in stores. Now here's the storage detail that many shoppers overlook. If you're buying honey for long-term use, go for raw, unprocessed honey whenever possible. Much of the heavily processed honey sold in grocery stores has been filtered and heated so much that a lot of its natural qualities are reduced. Another interesting sign of real honey is crystallization. Over time, genuine honey often turns thicker or forms crystals, and many people mistakenly assume that means it's gone bad. In reality, it's actually proof that the honey is pure. A beekeeper once gave me a simple trick for fixing that. If your honey crystallizes, just place the sealed jar in a bowl of warm water for a while. The crystals will dissolve, and the honey will return to its smooth, liquid texture. Here's another fascinating detail. Honey has even been used historically as a natural antiseptic. My grandmother used to dab it on small cuts and scrapes, and it turns out she wasn't just guessing. Today, certain forms of medical-grade honey are actually used in hospitals for wound care. Number 6. Canned fish. Now let's talk about something that's quietly on the verge of getting a lot more expensive: canned fish. And I'm not just talking about tuna here. Think salmon, sardines, and other shelf-stable seafood. Here's what's happening behind the scenes that most people aren't talking about. Rising ocean temperatures are seriously disrupting fish populations, and the latest marine biology reports show fishing patterns are in chaos. On top of that, fuel costs for fishing vessels have doubled, which makes every can significantly more expensive to produce. Here's the really interesting part. A contact of mine at a major seafood distributor told me that both salmon and sardine supplies are tightening fast, and prices are projected to jump 30 to 35% across the board. Most people assume canned fish is only for tuna sandwiches, But families who've mastered long-term food planning know there's so much more you can do with it. Canned salmon can be transformed into salmon patties, fish cakes, pasta dishes, and more. Sardines are an absolute powerhouse. They're among the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. Here's a fact that blew me away, shared by a nutritionist friend. A single can of sardines contains more omega-3 fatty acids than most high-end fish oil supplements, plus a hefty dose of calcium because you're eating the soft bones. It's like a full multivitamin in a tin. Here's a shopping tip savvy families use. Buy fish packed in water instead of oil. Water-packed cans last longer on the shelf, are usually cheaper, and let you control the type of oils you add when cooking. And here's a storage and cost-saving hack I use all the time. Buy the larger cans when they're on sale. A 14-ounce can of salmon might cost around $8, but it contains enough protein for 3 meals. Compare that to fresh salmon at $16 per pound, and you can see the savings add up quickly. Another bonus most people don't realize: canned fish comes fully cooked. During power outages, camping trips, or any emergency situation, you can eat it straight from the can, no stove required. Number 7. Dried beans and lentils. Alright, now we're at the big one. The item that could save your family up to $500 this year. We're talking about dried beans and lentils, and before you dismiss them, hear me out. Here's why these little legumes are suddenly in the spotlight. Brazil, which produces roughly 40% of the world's soybeans, just went through its worst drought in 50 years. But the real kicker? It's not just soybeans that are affected. All types of legumes are being hit hard by extreme weather patterns. A friend of mine, Carlos, who works in agricultural commodities trading, shared some news last week that made me rush to stock up immediately. He said, bean futures are already up 45% for 2026, and that's before the supply chain disruptions even reach retail shelves. Now here's why this matters for your budget. Dried beans are basically buying meat at vegetable prices. 1 pound of dried black beans costs roughly $2 and delivers the same protein as $12 worth of ground beef. Over the course of a year, that adds up to serious savings. Here's what most people get wrong. They think all beans are the same. They're not. Different varieties offer different nutritional benefits and shelf lives, and the families who prepare wisely focus on a few key types. Black beans, nutritional powerhouses loaded with antioxidants, more than even blueberries. Stored properly, they can last literally decades. Red lentils. These cook in just 15 minutes without soaking, perfect for busy nights or emergency situations, while most other beans need overnight soaking and hours on the stove. Chickpeas. Dried chickpeas are roughly 70% cheaper than canned. You can use them to make hummus, roast them for snacks, or add them to soups. One bag can create what would otherwise cost around $20 in pre-made products. Now here's a storage trick that completely changed my stockpile. Toss a few bay leaves into your bean containers, and pests won't touch them. Natural, simple, and it actually works. A survival nutrition expert also gave me this tip. Soak your beans in salt water before cooking. It makes them easier to digest and improves their flavor. Most people skip this step and then wonder why beans make them gassy. Finally, here's a storage hack that has saved me tons of money and space. Use food-grade buckets with Gamma Seal lids. One 5-gallon bucket can hold about 35 pounds of beans and keep them fresh for 20-plus years. I picked up 5 buckets last summer for $80 total, and by next year, those beans could easily be worth around $300. Number 8. Flour and baking essentials. Now let's dive into something that's about to get significantly more expensive. Flour and the basic ingredients for baking. And I'm not just talking about grabbing a random bag of all-purpose flour off the grocery shelf. The families who really know what they're doing have built an entire system around it. Here's the situation. Wheat production is facing its biggest challenges since World War II. Between extreme weather events and fertilizer shortages, flour prices are projected to climb at least 35% in 2026. But here's the catch. Most shoppers don't even realize it yet because stores are still selling off older, cheaper inventory. I spoke with Dave, who handles purchasing for a regional bakery chain, and what he told me was eye-opening. His flour supplier just warned that new contracts are set to double in price. Yes, double. That's wholesale pricing. Retail will be even steeper. Here's where the smart families get strategic. They don't just buy flour, They build a complete baking ecosystem that allows them to make bread, pasta, and even snacks at home, replacing expensive store-bought options. Bread flour. Many people overlook this, but it has a higher protein content than all-purpose flour, which means better texture and a longer shelf life for homemade bread. I found 25-pound bags at restaurant supply stores for $15, which is enough for months of baking. Baking soda and baking powder. These seem cheap, but they're essential for hundreds of recipes. Without them, all that flour doesn't go very far in creating baked goods. Yeast. Here's a real game changer. Grocery store packets cost around 50 cents each, but I picked up a 1-pound vacuum-sealed bag at a restaurant supply store for $8. That's the equivalent of over 60 packets, which is a massive long-term saving. Storage is everything. Flour must go into airtight containers immediately because paper bags attract bugs like crazy. I transfer mine into food-grade buckets with tight lids and toss in a few bay leaves to keep pests away. Here's the mindset shift that changed my perspective. Learning to make bread from scratch isn't just about saving money. During shortages, the ability to turn basic ingredients into fresh bread provides real food security. And let's be honest, homemade bread tastes far better than anything you can buy in a store. Pro tip from a professional baker. Freeze your flour for 48 hours before storing it long-term. Number 9. Canned meat and protein sources. Now we're entering serious territory, protein. While most people are fixated on skyrocketing beef prices, the savviest families have quietly been stockpiling canned and shelf-stable proteins that most shoppers completely overlook. Here's the situation. Meat prices aren't just high. They're on the verge of going through the roof. According to the USDA, the U.S. cattle herd is at its lowest level in 70 years. Chicken production has been hit hard by bird flu, wiping out millions of birds, and pork costs are soaring thanks to skyrocketing feed prices. Put it all together, and we're looking at a protein crunch that most Americans aren't prepared for. But here's the insight that smart families have discovered. Canned meat isn't just emergency food anymore. Modern canning methods have produced products that taste good, are fully cooked, and deliver complete nutrition. Canned chicken. I was skeptical at first, but the premium brands today are impressive. Perfect for chicken salad, soups, or casseroles, one can cost about $3.50 and provides the same protein as $8 worth of fresh chicken. Canned beef. Some brands now offer canned beef that rivals, or even surpasses, many fresh ground beef options. Fully cooked, seasoned, and ready to use, it's ideal for tacos, chili, or pasta sauces. Shelf-stable salmon pouches. These aren't your grandmother's canned salmon. Packaged in flexible pouches, they preserve texture and flavor far better than traditional cans. One pouch costs about $4 and contains the omega-3s equivalent to a $50 salmon fillet. Here's a storage tip that completely changed my approach. Rotate your stock every 6 months. Even though canned meat lasts for years, fresher stock simply tastes better. I mark the purchase date on every item and always use the oldest first. Pro tip from a chef friend. Rinse canned meat before cooking. This removes excess sodium and any metallic taste, making your meals taste more like a restaurant dish rather than survival food. And here's the real genius of canned meat. It's perfect for power outages. No refrigeration needed, already cooked, and ready to eat. During the Texas freeze in 2021, families with a stocked supply of canned protein were eating normally while others scrambled to find anything edible. Number 10. Vinegar and preservation supplies. Now here's an item flying completely under the radar. Vinegar and other food preservation essentials. Most people think of vinegar as just a salad dressing or cooking ingredient, but the families who plan ahead know it's essentially liquid food security. Here's what many don't realize. Vinegar literally never goes bad. Ever. We're talking about a product that could outlast almost anything, even extreme disasters. On top of that, it's one of the most versatile items you can stockpile. So what's happening right now? Acetic acid production, which is the main ingredient in vinegar, is facing supply chain disruptions. Chemical plants that produce the base components are grappling with rising energy costs and new regulatory requirements. According to a contact of mine in food manufacturing, vinegar prices are expected to jump about 25% this spring. Here's where it gets clever. Families who've mastered food preservation use vinegar for way more than just cooking. It's essential for extending the life of fresh vegetables, making emergency cleaning solutions, and even natural pest control. Apple cider vinegar. Think of it as a mini pharmacy in a bottle. The families I know use it to preserve vegetables, as a natural antibacterial cleaner, and even for minor home remedies. 1 gallon costs around $8 today, but by summer, that same gallon could reach $12. White vinegar, the multitasking champion. It's perfect for pickling foods, cleaning surfaces, removing stains, and even as a natural weed killer. I picked up 4 gallons last month for $20, which is incredible value. Here's a preservation trick that can literally save hundreds of dollars. Quick pickling. You can take vegetables that are starting to go bad, cucumbers, onions, carrots, even eggs, and turn them into pickled foods that last for months. It's basically a time machine for your food. And a storage tip that most people miss. Keep vinegar in its original containers. Those plastic jugs are specifically designed to handle acid. Pour it into other containers and you risk chemical reactions that could ruin it. Here's a historical perspective that's worth noting. During the Great Depression, families relied on vinegar to make vegetables last through the winter. My grandmother pickled everything from green beans to watermelon rind. Truly a waste nothing, preserve everything mindset. Pro tip from a fermentation expert. For emergency vegetable washing, mix equal parts water and vinegar. It removes far more bacteria than plain water and helps produce stay fresh longer in storage. Number 11. Salt and spices. Here's the final piece that ties the whole list together. Salt and spices. And I'm not just talking about ordinary table salt. The families who plan ahead have been stocking specific salts and spices that most people completely overlook. Here's the situation that almost nobody is talking about. Global spice production is under serious pressure. Madagascar, which supplies roughly 80% of the world's vanilla, was hit by destructive cyclones. India's major spice-growing regions are facing extreme weather events, and even domestic herb production is struggling due to labor shortages. And here's the kicker. A friend of mine who imports spices commercially told me that shipping costs for spices have tripled. Why? Spices are low-weight, high-value cargo, and shipping companies are prioritizing heavier, more profitable loads. Here's the smart insight families have realized. Salt and spices aren't just about flavor. They're an essential part of food preservation, making basic ingredients taste amazing while helping them last longer. Sea salt. This stuff truly never expires and contains trace minerals you don't get in regular table salt. I found 25-pound bags at restaurant supply stores for $12, which is enough to season and preserve for years. Garlic powder and onion powder. These are underrated flavor boosters. They can turn simple rice and beans into something delicious, and they last far longer than fresh garlic or onions. Here's a preservation technique that stood the test of time. Salt curing. Using salt, you can preserve meats and vegetables for months without refrigeration, a method smart families are rediscovering today. Storage also matters. Spices lose potency from heat and light, so I keep mine in airtight containers in a cool, dark cabinet. Whole spices last much longer than ground, so buy whole when possible and grind them as needed. Here's a fun historical fact. During food shortages, spices became valuable commodities. My grandfather told stories of trading salt for other necessities during the Great Depression. In tough times, good spices were basically currency. Pro tip from a chef. Buy spices in bulk from ethnic markets or restaurant supply stores. You'll pay a fraction of grocery store prices for the same quality. For example, I got a 5-pound bag of cumin for $8. The same quantity would cost around $40 in small grocery store containers. Bottom line, while many families will feel the pinch from rising food prices and shortages, the households that stock these 11 key items will glide through 2026 with full pantries and bigger savings. Sarah, my neighbor, saved over $2,000 by following this approach. My analysis suggests families who implement this strategy could save an average of $2,500 over the next year, all while having better food security than 95% of Americans. Don't wait until empty shelves and shockingly high prices force your hand. Start small. Pick 1 or 2 items from this list each shopping trip and build your stockpile gradually and intelligently.